Good morning, dear participants. In the University of Iceland Conference on Political Agency after COVID-19. My name is Jón Ólafsson, and I am Professor of Cultural Studies here at the University of Iceland. And I also currently lead a research project on democratic constitutional design. Here in Iceland, constitutional issues have been very central in the reaction to the great economic crisis of 2008 and remain contested as disappointment in how successive governments here as elsewhere have failed to accomplish meaningful reform both in policy making and governance, and economically becomes greater. And as the whole world faces a new crisis and a crisis in economic inequality, in powerlessness, and surprising confusion in responding to the current pandemic's enormous social and economical challenges, a new reality has really been exposed. So this is really what inspires today's conference. What happens next? What does the situation lead to? Politically, socially, culturally, and morally, perhaps. We have a number of distinguished speakers. You can see the program now on the screen, who will appear here in the course of the day. And there will be some opportunity not only to listen, but also I hope to ask questions. I'm not going to introduce the speakers. We will do so as we go. You can also, of course, check our site, constitution.ihi.is to see the details of the program. But let me now introduce our first speaker. Katrín Jakobsdóttir, the Icelandic Prime Minister, who has been in this country leading the response to COVID-19, along with public health officials and specialists. This is not the first crisis Katrín Jakobsdóttir has dealt with as a minister. She was Minister of Education in the left government that took over after the collapse of the Icelandic economy and the government in the wake of the so-called pot and pans revolution in early 2009. We are honored to have Katrín begin this conference with sharing with us her thoughts about the crisis and what might follow from it. So I'm going to put her on now.
Ladies and gentlemen, these days governments around the globe are facing a health emergency that has affected our societies in unprecedented ways and will continue to do so in the near future. The effects of the pandemic have already been profound, and not only will there be health-related and economic consequences, they will be social and political as well. The question remains how this crisis will affect our democracies, and this will be today's topic. What we have already witnessed are vastly different approaches by politicians and governments in dealing with the outbreak. We have witnessed attempts to exploit the pandemic to weaken the powers of parliament and to rule by decree, including with military presence. New laws have been adopted restricting freedoms of expression, with an increase in state-sponsored use of highly sophisticated surveillance technologies, raising a potential threat to civil liberties. But we have also witnessed reliance on expert advice and science. Democratic politicians, perhaps some reluctantly, are increasingly delegating to health experts the effort to contain the crisis. In Iceland, my government decided that we would follow the advice of the chief epidemiologist and the director of health, prioritizing health and well-being. Since the very beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic, we have been fully transparent with all our decisions through daily expert-led press conferences and an informative website with all official statistics on how the virus is spreading, including how many people have been infected, how many are quarantined, and broken down by location, age, and gender. This has resulted in a solid public knowledge about the pandemic, which has helped build the trust and solidarity needed to successfully contain the virus. It is a sign of societal strength when people are willing to limit their freedom of movement and suffer personal hardship for the benefit of society as a whole. I am extremely proud of the way Icelanders have put the public interests ahead of their own during this time, and that we were able to contain the virus with far less draconian emergency measures than in many other countries. Populist politicians have attacked science and the scientific establishment severely in recent years in an effort to undermine not only scientific results, but also democratic governance. The emergence of health officials and specialists as public leaders during the epidemic has caused a tentative re-emergence of trust in science, which will be extremely important in our immediate future. This may prove to be one of the positive outcomes of this crisis. The climate crisis will be right where we left it in February, and the lessons learned in tackling COVID will be extremely valuable for us to confront this ongoing threat to human existence. We are in the midst of an emergency. The challenge is how we will keep this new public involvement alive. The pandemic has widely increased trust in government and in public institutions, reflecting the need for solidarity when societies face common threats. Will this trust encourage more public involvement in shaping legislation and long-term policies, including constitutions? I do not have the answer to that question, but we certainly must do what we can to encourage that development. Here in Iceland, we have been doing that, for example, by organizing a deliberative poll on several constitutional issues, and hopefully we will continue to use those methods. This is one of the important challenges for democratic governments emerging out of the spring of lockdown. Our task is to continue strengthening trust and care as fundamental issues in government, not less than justice and prosperity. And let us not forget that we will most probably be doing so in the face of a nationalist and regressive backlash. As a leader of the left-green movement in Iceland, I have joined an international alliance of progressive forces, Progressive International, which launched earlier this week. I believe that we urgently need to forge global solidarities and collaboration between progressive forces across borders and against an authoritarian and populist right bent on using the crisis to advance its regressive agenda. In the next years, all governments will face the challenge of implementing policies that may not be suited to maximize economic growth. When we think about climate, democracy, human rights, migration, etc. The pandemic has, in a sense, acted as an accelerator for the upcoming vast societal changes. I believe that the common experience of the pandemic from across the globe could make that transition easier. This is, however, far from certain and will need a great deal of public involvement to ensure positive lessons are taken from this situation. I wish you all a productive and fruitful discussion and look forward to following up on the ideas discussed here today.